Hi there. I want to share with you my thoughts about this channel, about the world, about what has been going on in the world, how my channel has been transformed, how my views have been transformed, and the mission for this channel changed. First, when I started, my mission was to change the minds of people to deconvert. And because I'm in the US, I was thinking about Christians. But as time passed, things changed. I started reading more and more about what's going on around the world. I started reading a lot about Islam. And I speak to a lot of Muslims. Islam is overshadowing now everything else. Islam is so bad, is so dangerous. Muslims are so vulnerable to parasitic ideas that overshadow any kind of humanity from our Western perspective. People stoned to death, people support it because it's written in the Quran. It's vastly different from what Christianity is these days. There is 500 years gap between Christianity and Islam, and the trend is different. Christianity further and further becomes secularized. Christian Europe becomes secular Europe. Religion in Europe becomes marginalized. And that is slowly happening in the US too. With Islam, everything is the opposite. Muslims feel offended and humiliated. Muslims painfully react to the fact that Islamic rule, the power of the Quran, are slowly dissipating, going to nothingness. And then they feel mobilized. They turn back to the roots. They turn back to fundamentals. They feel like returning to strict Sharia, strict rule as prescribed by Muhammad, is the best way to go forward. They feel threatened. They don't want to integrate to the West. They don't want to integrate to the global society. Their global vision is global Islam. Everything should integrate to Islam because Islam is superior. I even see it in the comments of my videos. They say that Islam is ideal. It's not just regular people who comment my videos. It's millions upon millions of people who say that Islamic law, Sharia, is the best thing in the world. So my priorities have shifted. I want to deconvert not just some theists. I want to deconvert Muslims. Deconverting as many Muslims as possible is so important that I actually think that it doesn't matter whether you make them atheists, agnostics, or Christians. As we can see with Christianity, it dissipates on its own. One of the ways to deconvert Muslims on a massive scale is to convert them to Christianity. That's why I endorse some Christian YouTubers who debunk Islam, who specialize in deconverting Muslims. It's interesting that their Muslim audiences deconvert, and not all of them convert to Christianity. Many of them become atheists. I do realize that Christianity in the United States still poses a problem, but I think that modern secular world should have a concrete plan how to stop Islamization of the West, also how to secularize the Muslim majority countries. And I think that it should be top priority for every politician. It should also be a top priority for every secular person on YouTube who cares about what's going on in the world and who cares what's going on in the United States and what will be in the United States in some 20, 50 years. People ask me, what do you propose to do? In the book Stealth Jihad, which I have just read by Robert Spencer, there is a plan. And I actually share and endorse this plan. For some people, it will sound quite radical, but I honestly think that we are at war, we are targeted, we are attacked. By sleeping, by denying the fact, we will not come to any good position. If we sleep further, we'll find ourselves in the position when we'll have to fight for our freedoms with real weapons. The trend is this: more and more Western laws and rulings protect elements of Sharia law. If we don't wake up now, if we don't stop it, we'll find ourselves in a position when our laws do not support freedom anymore. We don't want to give our civilization in this state to our children. Peace.
Despite denials from various Muslim leaders that such hostile Islamic enclaves really exist in Britain, Nazir Ali's account was indirectly confirmed by the British government in March 2008, when officials forbade British military personnel from wearing their uniforms in certain parts of the country in order to avoid abuse from ethnic minorities. The spreading of Islamic separatism and the adoption of Sharia law in British communities really should come as no surprise, since this is the documented agenda of numerous Muslim leaders in Britain. This was exposed by an undercover investigation of British mosques by Britain's Channel 4 Dispatches program in late 2006, which found Muslim preachers exhorting audiences to create a state within a state in Britain. One preacher, Dr. Ijaz Mian, claimed, "You cannot accept the rule of the kafir, unbeliever. We have to rule ourselves, and we have to rule the others." In France, meanwhile, Daniel Pipes reported in November 2006 that there are no less than 751 areas in France that are euphemistically classified as sensitive urban zones, ZUS. Pipes explains that these are places in France that the French state does not control, and that a more precise name for these zones would be Dar al-Islam, the place where Muslims rule. European historian and journalist Paul Bellien noted in January 2008 that these areas have also become magnets for Mafia groups. The ZUS are centers of drug trafficking. Since they operate from within the ZUS, the drug dealers are beyond the reach of the French authorities. The ZUS exist not only because Muslims wish to live in their own areas, according to their own culture and their own Sharia laws, but also because organized crime wants to operate without the judicial and fiscal interference of the French state. In France, Sharia law and Mafia rule have become almost identical. There are zones of this kind all over Europe. Deutsche Welle TV discovered one in September 2007 in the Molenbeek neighborhood of Brussels, when a local Muslim leader threatened its film crew and denied they had a right to film there. Of this man, Deutsche Welle remarked, "Belgian laws do not interest him. The man is confident that it is he who controls the neighborhood." It continued, "Many police officers are afraid that the state no longer wields authority here, at least not the sole authority. They know that Islamists view Molenbeek as subject only to Muslim law." Europe is now reaping what it has long sown. In her book, Eurabia, Bat Yeor, the pioneering historian of Dimitude, chronicles how this has come to pass. Europe, she explains, began 30 years ago to travel down a path of appeasement, accommodation, and cultural abdication in pursuit of short-sighted political and economic benefits. She observes that today, Europe has evolved from a Judeo-Christian civilization with important post-Enlightenment secular elements to a civilization of Dimitude, that is, Eurabia, a secular Muslim transitional society with its traditional Judeo-Christian mores rapidly disappearing. If Western Europe does become Islamized, as demographic trend suggests, before too long America will be facing a world that is drastically different and more forbidding than today, and the same process of Islamization will proceed here, unless enough people wake up in time to head it off. Myrick's counter-Jihad plan: McCarthyism or common sense? One of the few who have awakened to the danger is Representative Sue Myrick, Republican, North Carolina. In April 2008, she unveiled a 10-point plan for fighting against jihadist activity in the United States, including stealth jihad activity. Myrick's plan was unusual for its sheer singularity. Few of her colleagues in any branch of government have offered any concrete proposals for resisting the jihad beyond various counter-terrorism initiatives, and hardly any have noticed the stealth jihad at all. Myrick's proposals became yet another test case for self-proclaimed moderate Muslim leaders, and again they failed. One might have thought that those Muslims who profess to oppose today's global jihad would have welcomed Myrick's initiative as a way to isolate the Islamic extremists they claim to reject. But instead, local Islamic leaders roundly denounced Myrick. One Muslim leader from Myrick's district, Jibril Huff, of the Islamic Center of Charlotte, charged that Myrick's latest attempt at fighting terrorism is nothing more than a fear campaign. It is nothing more than a new McCarthyism, or Myrickism. As Muslims, we have become expendable as politicians like Myrick seek political gain. Myrick responded by inviting the Islamic Center of Charlotte to offer a point-by-point rebuttal to her proposals. But neither Jibril Huff nor any other Muslim leader showed any interest in accommodating her request. Their opposition to Myrick's plan, however, is illuminating in itself. Myrick's first two proposals were to investigate all military and prison chaplains endorsed by Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who was serving 23 years in prison for funding jihadist terrorism. Is it not possible that some of the military and prison chaplains he endorsed share his jihadist views? Would Jibril Huff be able to explain why it should not be important to find out? Myrick then called for an investigation of the selection process of the Arabic translators employed in the Pentagon and the FBI. As we saw in Chapter 10, an FBI whistleblower has reported that Arabic translators there cheered the September 11 attacks. Would Huff be able to explain why this should not be a cause for concern? The remainder of Myrick's plan consisted of the following proposals. 1. Examine the non-profit status of the Council on American Islamic Relations. In light of the information we examined in Chapter 5, would Huff be able to explain why CAIR's tax-exempt status should not at least be examined? 2. Make it an act of sedition or solicitation of treason to preach or publish materials that call for the deaths of Americans. Could Islamic leaders object to this for any reason other than their attachment to the stealth jihad? 3. Audit sovereign wealth funds in the United States. If these funds may be used to conduct economic and cultural warfare against the U.S., what exactly could Huff's objection be? 4. Cancel scholarship student visa programs with Saudi Arabia until they reform their textbooks. As we saw in Chapter 8, it is demonstrably true that Saudi textbooks promote hatred of non-Muslims. Would Islamic leaders like Huff endorse this hatred and violence, or do they prefer for some reason that non-Muslims not know what Saudi-funded Islamic schools are teaching in the United States? 5. Restrict religious visas for imams who come from countries that don't allow reciprocal visits by non-Muslim clergy. Is there some reason we can't insist on a modicum of religious toleration from Islamic countries? And 6. Cancel contracts to train Saudi police and security in U.S. counterterrorism tactics, and block the sale of sensitive military munitions to Saudi Arabia. Given ongoing Saudi financing of the global jihad, this is simple common sense. After promulgating her plan, Myrick expressed her desire to open a dialogue with the Islamic Center of Charlotte, insisting that the whole point is that we're trying to get people to work together. Yet in response, the leader of Charlotte's Islamic community resorted to the predictable charges of McCarthyism and bigotry. And he was not alone. CAIR's Ibrahim Hooper mounted his familiar hobby horse to decry Myrick's plan, arguing, "It sounds like your usual laundry list of talking points you can see on anti-Muslim hate sites on the internet." As we saw in Chapter 3, this is a tested and proven strategy. But Americans who are aware of the stealth jihad cannot afford to let it go unchallenged. Myrick's plan should have been discussed on every major news feature show on television, talk radio, and in the newspapers. That her proposal did not receive serious attention is yet another indication of how far the public debate is today from anything resembling an informed discussion on jihadist terrorism. And that puts us all at a risk greater than the one we already must endure. Other ways to counter the stealth jihad. Every one of Myrick's recommendations should be implemented. But opponents of the stealth jihad must first inform the public that her plan exists and explain why it's so vital. 7 years after September 11, raising awareness about the nature and goals of the global Islamic jihad remains the foremost responsibility of all lovers of freedom. We must stand strongly for freedom of speech against those who would strip it away. The core of our struggle is civil rights. Will we defend them or let them go, as Europe and Canada, in many ways, already have? Many people argue that such a turn of events simply couldn't happen here in America. Well, it never has, because we never let it. But are we too addicted to oil and convenience at this point to resist any longer? As we campaign to implement the Myrick Plan, we should advocate the following additional steps. 1. Enforce existing laws. Section 2385 of the Federal Criminal Code states that whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises, or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any state, territory, district, or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force or violence, or by the assassination of another officer of any such government, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the United States or any department or agency thereof for the 5 years next following his conviction. If this law were enforced against Islamic groups in the United States, the stealth jihad could be stopped in its tracks. 2. Reclassify Muslim organizations. Any Muslim group in America that does not explicitly renounce, in transparent and manifest deed as well as word, any intention now or in the future to replace the Constitution of the United States with Islamic Sharia should either be closed or at a minimum be classified as a political rather than a religious organization, and made subject to all the responsibilities and standards to which political organizations must adhere. Likewise, mosques and Islamic schools should be closely monitored, and any that preach Islamic supremacism in the United States summarily closed. 3. End Muslim immigration into the United States. This is a simple matter of national security. Immigration policy must work toward the integration of all immigrants, and the all-encompassing societal program of Sharia makes the integration of pious Muslims ultimately impossible. While there are undoubtedly millions of Muslims who have no interest in jihad, either by violence or stealth, no Islamic authorities anywhere in the world have declared heretical or in any way unacceptable the idea that non-Muslims must be fought against by various means and subjugated under the rule of Islamic law. Unless and until that begins to happen, no one can be sure of the sentiments of any individual believer. Consequently, simply to protect ourselves, there should be an end to Muslim immigration, combined with a clear notice to Muslims in the United States that any action on behalf of Sharia supremacism is unacceptable. But ending Muslim immigration to America must be considered a long-term goal, since such a measure is impossible in today's political climate. The proposal would inevitably be denounced as racist, despite the fact that jihadist supremacism is not a race. But at the very least, immigration officials should immediately adopt a program to screen Muslims entering the United States for jihadist sentiments. This will provide grounds for deportation if an entrant renounces some aspect of Sharia supremacism on his immigration application and then works for it once in the country. And finally, 4, take pride in our own culture. We must reject the revisionism and self-hatred that dominates the textbook view of U.S. history and Western civilization today, and recognize that Western culture, threatened in many particulars that we take for granted, is worth defending. American schools should rescue their curriculum from the empty rhetoric of inclusion and multiculturalism, and place a greater emphasis on the study of our own country and of Western civilization. We must relearn our own history, take pride in it, and revere, not find new ways to deride, those who built the political and legal institutions of this country, with its unrivaled freedoms and solicitude for the individual. As far as the study of Islam goes, we must demand that schools eliminate the misinformation deliberately inserted into textbooks by Islamic interest groups. In the end, will the price be too high? In 1995, speaking at a conference of the Muslim Arab Youth Association in Toledo, Ohio, Muslim Brotherhood Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi declared, "We will conquer Europe. We will conquer America, not through sword, but through dawah," Islamic proselytizing. This is the Brotherhood's agenda for Western countries, to conquer them by stealth. In the years since al-Qaradawi's proclamation, the power and influence of Islam has grown exponentially in America, alongside mounting calls for Americans to adapt to Sharia provision. Where will it end? It will not end until America adopts Islamic law, unless enough Americans resist. But even if America never becomes a full-blown Sharia state, how much of our freedoms and rights will be allowed to erode before we stand up and call a halt to this attack? The current signals are disconcerting. Hurt Wielder's film Fitna, discussed in Chapter 4, first appeared at an online video uploading site, liveleak.com. However, the day after it was originally posted, LiveLeak pulled the film, replacing it with the following announcement. Following threats to our staff of a very serious nature, and some ill-informed reports from certain corners of the British media that could directly lead to the harm of some of our staff, LiveLeak.com has been left with no other choice but to remove Fitna from our servers. This is a sad day for freedom of speech on the net, but we have to place the safety and well-being of our staff above all else. We would like to thank the thousands of people from all backgrounds and religions who gave us their support. They realized LiveLeak.com is a vehicle for many opinions, and not just for the support of one. Perhaps there is still hope that this situation may produce a discussion that could benefit and educate all of us as to how we can accept one another's culture. We stood for what we believed in, the ability to be heard, but in the end, the price was too high. In the end, the price was too high. That mournful phrase could be the epitaph of the Free West, particularly given the fact that the film merely reports, accurately, how jihadists commit and justify acts of violence and supremacism. Truth, as the hate crime trials of Mark Steyn and other developments indicate, is no longer a defense. LiveLeak's concern for its employees was legitimate. They didn't sign up for death threats and violent intimidation. And a few days later, apparently after the company increased its security, it reinstated Fitna. But beyond this incident, if Americans, Westerners, and all people who are threatened by the global jihad and Islamic supremacism are not willing to stand up and fight for this cause, then all is lost. Because the jihadists are willing to go all the way, to give up their very lives in their quest to control ours. For them, no price is too high. If fighting against jihad is too high a price for a free people, then, ultimately, we will have to pay a different price, the jizya, the tax specified by Quran Surah 9, verse 29, for certain non-Muslims, particularly Jews and Christians, subjugated as inferiors under the rule of Islamic Sharia law. Whatever happened to "give me liberty or give me death," or "with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor"? Will the price that the children and beneficiaries of those heroic sacrifices are willing to pay prove too high? The answer will come clear sooner than most people think.